You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us. I'm Annie in America.
And I'm Johanna in Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. The podcast that covers murder, mystery, and the macabre throughout history. As we told you before, we are currently taking a little break to enjoy the holidays with our families, and we normally don't share an episode during our break. But this year, we're happy to have some content for you to enjoy while we spend some murder-free quality time with loved ones.
We were honored to speak with Johanna's friend Ingrid about the experience she survived when her husband was kidnapped. This is a conversation we had for our Patreon subscribers, and it was such an incredible and moving story that we wanted to share it with all of you. So wherever you are and whatever you celebrate or don't, we wish you and yours health and happiness in the year to come.
Yes, let's all hope for an amazing year 2024. And we will be back with our usual content next week. Enjoy.
Hey, it's Annie here, and
Hi.
I am in a Zoom call with Johanna and her friend Ingrid, who I have never met and who apparently there's a story I have to hear, and so I am here to hear it. I'm here.
We're all
hear
here.
We're
all here. We're going to hear it.
It's going to be good.
Ingrid. First of all, she's my friend from Hamburg, and we met when we were both living in Mexico. We were both married to our Mexican husbands at the time and working at the same place. That's how we met. And we reconnected via Facebook. And something happened to her family, which is, I don't know even how to call it. Is it like it's a very scary thing that happened. Everything is fine now. So just spoiler alert here. But maybe, Ingrid, you want to introduce yourself a little bit. How did you end up in Mexico?
Okay, sure. Well, we probably have to go back quite a few years because maybe I should start by explaining how I actually ended up in Mexico. Mm-hmm. As Johanna stated, I'm from Hamburg in northern Germany, and that's where I've been born and raised. And in year 2000, and I just realized how old I am. I participated in the so-called international program working at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. So at Epcot, you have 11 pavilions from various countries around the world, and the participants of the international program get to work for 1 year as cultural representatives at the pavilion of their home country, which in my case, of course, was Germany. Everyone participating in that program, back then we were about 100 people per pavilion, so it's quite a lot of people, get to live together in a gated community, which was built by Disney, which is also very close to the parks. And as you can imagine, if you put a lot of young people to work and live together, well, it's we had a lot of
fun. So is it like the Olympic Village, but just Disney style?
Precisely, yeah, that's and what it actually looked like. And of course, then you had 365 days of sunshine, and we had our pools, and everybody, we would just hang out, having the time of our lives. It was really amazing. And that's where I met a handsome young man from Mexico who worked as a cultural representative at the Mexican pavilion. And we got married then 2 years later.
Nice.
So after my Disney program ended, I, of course, returned to Germany. But since I had so many new friends from around the world, and of course, a boyfriend in Mexico, I wasn't quite ready yet to settle down completely back in native Hamburg, and decided to hire as a flight attendant for German Airlines Lufthansa. From my base out of Munich, I traveled all around the world, and whenever I had free time, I would head over to Mexico, to Monterrey, where my then boyfriend lived at the time. Sometimes even just for a weekend, because, as a flight attendant, we paid almost nothing for the flights. That's, by the way, another thing I have in common with Johanna. Oh, I don't know if it's spoiled here.
Amazing.
And so I think about after a year or so after we started dating, I got to meet the family. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
I have.
Then you can imagine the scenario, but Mexican style. So
I love that. I love that.
I loved it too, but it was also very scary at the moment because in my family it was basically my mother, my sister, and that's it.
Yeah, I feel like meeting your husband's family was probably how my late husband's family felt when they brought home an American. Right. I'm a lot.
So imagine back then, I had a flight for work from Tokyo to Frankfurt. I spent 2 hours at Frankfurt just changing clothes. I took the next plane to Mexico, which was another 12 hours. So I had just spent 24 hours in the air. Ugh. And I landed in Mexico City, took the next plane to Merida, Yucatan, where my husband's family lived, well, the maternal side. And they were waiting for me. My husband picked me up at the airport and said, well, we're meeting at my grandmother's home. And from what I understand, another aunt will be there. And I said, sure, no problem. And when I arrived, the house, it was utter craziness. So there were, I don't know how many people. Imagine my now ex-husband, spoiler, mother had 11 siblings. So my ex-husband and his cousins, they were around 60 to 80. And then the next generation were quite a few more, and all of these people gathered at the house. So they're very, of course, tight-knit. It's typical Mexican family, which is beautiful, really, really beautiful. But it's also a bit overwhelming when you just spend 24 hours in the air and you don't know what's going on. So it was quite something, I must say.
Yeah.
But that didn't scare me enough. So Enrique and I did get married in 2002, had our first one in 2003, and our second born in 2004. And since Germany is very generous with social benefits, I had the privilege to have 2 years of parental leave, which was well paid, and 2 extra years with a little less pay, but still enough to get by. And I said to Enrique, well, this is the time. Let's go to Mexico so I can live it for a while. It's anyway also the culture of our 2 children, and not but Mexican too. And I thought that was the best idea. And that's what we did. The initial idea was just to stay in Mexico for a year. But then I fell in love with the country. And I said, nope, we're staying. My husband was fine with either one. So Mexico it was. And it really was. Mexico is a beautiful country.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So rich in culture, in history, in colors, and food,
the people,
noise,
everything.
The people.
Yeah. Really fun fact, Ingrid's children were born on the same day, 1 year apart. It's like with Moose and you.
Were you?
Oh, yeah? Is Moose your brother or sister? Or
So, yeah, my sister and I are adopted, and we have the same birthday, 2 years apart on the same day. But then about 7 years ago, I found my birth mom and met my biological family on that side. And I have 2 half brothers who are also the same date of birth, 4 years apart.
But crazy. You all 4 of you share the same birthday? Or
no, 2 different birthdays.
Okay. Wow.
So yeah, 2 in May, 2 in March, but the same day. It's just, there's a lot of funny stuff. My birth mom and I have the same wedding anniversary. Just a lot of funny little things, but I can't wait to visit Mexico, like really properly visit Mexico.
I miss it a lot, often, very often.
Yeah.
Me too. I haven't been back since I moved back to Germany, which I'll tell you about later, of course. But it really is one of a kind, and especially the people. It's everything. It's everything. The country is just really, really, really gorgeous.
It's where my husband's father's family are from, so it would be really nice to go back and visit sort of different areas.
Then you get the big fat Mexican family gathering too.
Yeah. I think they're mostly in like Aguascalientes and around there. I'm not really sure, but I'm excited.
Didn't you visit Aguascalientes too, Johanna? Wasn't that?
No, I went to San Luis Potosí. That's where my husband's family was from. That was also the last time I've been to Mexico, when we were already living in Austria, and we visited, I think it was, Jesus, I would have to think. I left Mexico in 2009. I think I've been back in 2010 or 2011, probably. 2010, probably. That was the last time. So 13 years ago. Yeah.
I don't think I realized it was that recent, Johanna. For some reason, I thought you were Yeah. Time, it turns out, is a struggle for me. So you're
As
living
I said,
in Mexico.
You're living in Mexico, and then at one point you're living in Cancun. That's where we met.
Exactly, that's where we met. Well, when we first arrived, we were the first few weeks in Tabasco. That's an actual state in Mexico, by the Gulf of Mexico, not just a hot sauce.
That's right.
My in-laws, well, my father and mother-in-law moved to Tabasco when they were young, as there were job opportunities, and they ended up staying, and that's where they based their family. So my husband and his 4 siblings. But we never had the plan to live in Tabasco, but rather opted for Merida, where all the maternal family lived, all the crazy bunch, because Merida was easier to get a job for my husband. I was still on my maternal leave, so I was fine, but there were just more opportunities in Merida. Plus, it's a rather a more international place than Tabasco. So even though it was still very far, of course, from home, it was easier to settle to as a foreigner. So we decided for Merida. That's where we stayed for 1 year, and I loved my time there. But then my husband was transferred to Cancun, and believe it or not, we really didn't want to go. Even though Cancun, of course, is by the Caribbean Sea and it's beaches and gorgeous and beautiful, but we had our family in Merida and had just settled there. It took me quite a while to get used to it. And now I had to uproot my roots again that I had just made and move to another city. I wasn't quite happy, but then after a while, I got used to Cancun too. And my neighbor worked at a resort in the Riviera Maya, about 45 minutes from Cancun, and invited me to work there too. It had just opened and was projected to be an enormous resort, which it was in the end. And that's where Johanna and I met.
That's true. And I think we both pretty quickly clicked and connected because, well, first of all, we could talk German to each other, and then with a flight attendant, married to Mexican husbands, and, this kind of...
A lot in common.
Yeah.
It's so lucky that you found each other.
Absolutely, yeah. I was quite sad when Johanna left. I was actually wondering about that earlier today when I thought of the whole story, at what time Johanna left. So 2009, you said, right?
I think, well, let me think. I went to live in Cancun in 2006. And I've been there almost 2 years. So it must have been 2008, 2009 that I left when my dad got sick and I wanted to come back home. Yeah, that's when we returned to Austria. Well, I returned and my ex-husband went with me. Yeah.
I stayed, of course, in Cancun with my family. I was at the resort working for quite a long time, many years. But my passion had always been chocolate. And I don't know if you actually know that Mexico is the home of cacao. It used to be actually a currency for indigenous cultures. So the cacao bean. And in Cancun back then, there wasn't a single chocolate shop. Of course, you'd have the supermarket chocolate that was available, but nothing really handmade. Yeah. Have any good chocolate. And my idea was, why wouldn't I be the first one to open a chocolate shop here? So I saved up money. And then one day I took the leap and said, let's do it. I'm going to do my own business. And for that reason, I left the resort and we decided to move to Tabasco for a while. Because in Tabasco is where actually you have the chocolate, the cacao plantations. And I thought, okay, that's a great opportunity. So I can actually learn the whole process from the harvesting of the cocoa beans to the processing of the cocoa up to the moment to actually have the made chocolate in hand. And I first went to New York. I enrolled in the Culinary Institute of America in New York. And
you joined the CIA.
Yes, I did.
Nice.
You know what? I remember that now. I completely forgot about that. I followed that a little bit on Facebook back then. Yeah, you went to New York. Yeah.
Well, the problem was that right afterwards, the catastrophe hit. So, spoiler, I never actually opened my store and I had to let go of all of those dreams because, well, we then got quite unlucky. So after about 3-4 months that we lived in Tabasco, which again is the place where my in-laws lived, we had the unfortunate event happening that my husband got kidnapped.
That's just not a statement you hear very often.
No.
And that's where we were living when my husband got kidnapped. That's a nightmare. That's an absolute nightmare.
Yeah. When I first moved to Mexico, and I'm sure Johanna agrees, the country was a whole different country from what it turned to several years later.
Absolutely.
Because when I first moved to Mexico, it was paradise. It was quiet. It was serene. It was peaceful. slowly and little by little, you would see on the news of course, crime in relation with drugs. But we figured, well, hey, we're just a regular family. We have nothing to do whatsoever with drugs. We're safe. We're good. Nothing's going to happen to us. Well, bad mistake.
Well, I remember when I was never scared in Cancun. There was really not a lot of crime. And you had this cartel crimes, but it was always like contained to certain areas in Mexico. And it was not involving regular people. It was cartels fighting cartels, basically.
Right. Like in the United States, you have gang violence in places.
Exactly.
But for the most part, if you are smart about things, and it doesn't, you want to say it doesn't affect you, because obviously that affects everybody. But I understand what you mean. It's not something you worry about in your sphere. I mean, there are people in cities all over the world with that kind of, exactly that situation.
Yeah. What happened in Mexico after a while, though, was that, yes, the cartels were fighting each other. And then the government, of course, was fighting the cartels, and it was a whole mess. But then people took advantage of the situation, of the instability, and then started doing their own little side business, for example, in kidnapping. So the people that actually were after my family, they were not cartels. That's what we know. But they did take advantage of, well, the all-around crime that was going on. And the police was overwhelmed, the government was overwhelmed, and couldn't be everywhere where anything happened. So
you're living your normal day-to-day life. You're in Tabasco with your family, and your husband was working then, or? Exactly,
yeah. Well, my in-laws still had their business, and my husband was working in the family business. We lived in a small town outside of Villahermosa. Villahermosa is the capital of Tabasco, but we lived 45 minutes outside in the countryside in a small town of about 2,000 to 2,500 inhabitants. So very rural Mexican, very down to earth, middle of nowhere Mexico. And of course, I thought, well, what's going to happen to us here? But even there, crime started to get closer. You would hear more and more crime surrounding us, which not only affected people related in the drug scene, but also just regular people being kidnapped, for example. So what happened that day is, since we were living in a small town, there was nothing to do for our kids, which back then were 9 and 10 years old. And we used to take my son for art classes in Villahermosa. So twice a week, we would go to Villahermosa by car and drive back in the evening to the small town. That day, my one son was in the car. The other son was with my mother-in-law. And we drove home. Well, first of all, no, I have to go back a week before that. We drove home with a week before that. I was driving, and I noticed in front of us there was a truck with the door open. Not a truck, not a trailer, but like a soccer mom car. I don't know what you call them.
Like an SUV.
Exactly. It had the side door open. And I said to Enrique, look at that. The car.
Like a minivan.
Yeah, a minivan. Exactly.
Oh, a minivan. Gotcha. Okay.
I saw that and I thought, well, that's strange. And I don't know why, but Enrique said, that is strange. Go quick, go fast, go everything good. Give it everything that you have. Let's leave them behind. And I did. Then a week later, we arrived home from art class. I had just gotten out of the car that day. My husband was driving. And I went to open the gate to our house. And the moment I had just put in the key, I heard screeching tires behind me, and the same minivan stopped in front of our house. And I saw 4 or 5 guys, typical image, with those hats on their how do you call it?
Like balaclava masks.
Yeah, ski mask.
Balaclava. Yeah.
Exactly. Which is very unusual because Tabasco is a very hot place. So of course they come running like crazy. They had those hats. I knew, okay, shit, what's happening?
Yeah.
2 guys directly jumped on me. They put a gun to my head and told me to be quiet. I was in shock, and I immediately knew, not even thinking, because at that moment you cannot even think anymore. Your brain goes in survival instinct, and my instinct was to keep quiet, not to scream, and that's what I did. And I noticed the other two guys crashing in the car window, and through the window they took out my husband, put him in the car, in their van, and they took off. Before they took off, they also took my bag, my handbag. So I didn't have my keys by then, was in the bag. My cell phone was in the bag. I couldn't get in the house. I couldn't place a phone call because, again, I didn't have a cell phone.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So for a few seconds, which seemed like an eternity, I was standing on the street. I tried to get my thoughts on, okay, what do I do now? And my first reaction, of course, was to knock on the door of the neighbors to ask for the phone. And I could see that lights were on, and I could see their how do you call it? Gardine, Johanna?
The curtains.
The curtains were moving, so they were at home. But of course, they had heard what was going on outside, so they were scared, and nobody answered the door. So,
that's awful. That, and that is such a fear in general that I have. You hear these stories, of someone getting it wrong and not answering the door and not helping, and that is. Oh, and now just remind me, your children, one was at art school and the other one was with your mother-in-law, so neither of the kids saw this?
No, thankfully, one kid was, we were coming back from art school, but on the way back, my mother-in-law had called and said, before you get home, drop off the other son, because we're having dinner right now, and so you don't have to cook. So
that was so lucky.
Thankfully, we're so lucky.
Yeah.
Because otherwise my son would have been in the car at 9 years old.
It's just too much on a, I mean, it's too much for anybody, but never mind your children. Yeah.
Child, plus you wouldn't know. Of course, a child would scream, a child would cry.
And maybe they would have taken him as well.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, we did talk about that afterwards, and not with the kidnappers, but I talked to my husband, and the whole thing had been planned beforehand. It's insane, because while my husband was in captivity, okay, let's go step by step so we don't
Yes.
So I was standing on the street. Nobody would open the door. I was desperate. I had to let my in-laws know, but I didn't have any choice. So I started running to their home, and that's what I did. My in-laws back then were old already. They were advanced in age, and running over to their home, I was thinking, okay, how do I tell them? I feared they would have I feared my mother-in-law would have a heart attack. But of course, I had to let them know.
Yeah, of course.
What other choice did I have? So I went home. My mother-in-law opened the door. I asked where the kids were, and they said, oh, they're in the room watching TV. The door was closed, so I knew they wouldn't hear me. And I told my mother-in-law what happened. She went, I never forget her face. It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking.
That's her baby.
It's her son. It's her child. So we sat in the living room, the three of us. Okay, what do we do? What is our first step? And my father-in-law said, well, I'm well connected to the military base, which they had outside of the small town where we lived. And I'm going to go and ask for help, which is what he did. He came back, and he said the person he had wanted to talk to wasn't there. So he wasn't able to achieve anything yet. And just as we were discussing what to do, then the phone rang. And I picked up the phone. Oh God. And it was really just like in the movies. I heard a voice. I still have that voice in my head. I think until the day that I die, I have that voice in my head. And he said he had Enrique. And he said he had learned that my father-in-law had gone to the military base. And if we tried going back there, or if we contacted the authorities, we will never see Enrique again. And then he said to stand close by the phone, and he would call back, and hung up.
It's so beyond comprehension how quickly they hear these things, and how well they are connected, and how everything is planned out, right?
Yeah, I think they probably had somewhere in the streets
watching.
Yeah, someone had to be watching the house. Yeah,
that, and I'm also quite sure it's somebody on the problem is in Mexico. policemen, for example, depending on the area, but policemen are always underpaid.
Yeah.
That's the amount of money they're being paid. I know in Cancun, back then when we lived there, they earned about $250 a month, and you cannot feed your family on that month. So they depend on other incomes to survive.
And that's a huge problem. Anytime you have somebody in power that doesn't make enough money to feed their children, that's a liability.
They even have a word. No, is it mordida? The bite
exactly,
you give?
Yeah, exactly. And I know that they actually have to share their mordidas with their superiors, and they have to deliver a certain amount of money to them each month. It's just crazy.
It's a fucked situation for everybody.
Yeah.
So then my sister-in-law arrived at home. We told her what happened. And in the meanwhile, what I had tried to do is to call, well, you're going to laugh, but there's a 1-800 number you call for kidnapping situations. And that's, of course, what I did. But I tried getting through, and I tried for hours. And it was always I was on hold or the line got disconnected. So I was never able to speak to somebody.
Oh my God. I'm just the visual of dialing the 1-800 number for your kidnap, and you're on hold.
Yeah.
Like you call the 1-800, like I know everything worked out okay. So part of me is just like, how does that even work? They're like, hi, we know you or someone you love's been kidnapped and we'll be with you as soon as we can. That's what you get here.
But also the question is, if you're on hold, how busy are they?
Very busy, apparently, yeah.
It just brings up a whole host of problematic and terrifying questions, doesn't it?
It does. I must say, though, that in the end, I have all my respect. It goes out to that force of the government, because they really did help us. Without them, I would have never seen my husband again. That's for sure. So after a few hours, the other first thing that we did is we got our kids out of the house, my kids out of the house. They were the only kids back then. My sister-in-law didn't have kids, so they were the only ones, thankfully. And what we did is we sent them over to the house of another aunt. Mm-hmm. So that grandmother had the measles, and of course they had their, how do you call it, the Impfung?
The vaccination.
The vaccination, but they were small kids that didn't realize what was going on. I just said, okay, you need to get out of the house. You're going to get measles, so I'll pick you up in a few days.
Good.
Of course, I wouldn't want the kids to live what was happening. And at the same time, my sister-in-law finally got through in the 1-800 line to somebody and told them what had happened. And they filed the case, and they said to stand by. They would call us back and let us know when they would have help on the way. And that's when the whole rescue mission started. It was immensely well executed. The very next day, they sent 2 agents over to the airport. We had to pick them up in our car in the trunk so that if anybody was watching, they wouldn't see that we had agents coming into the home.
So, okay, hang on, because I feel like you're downplaying a little bit the fact that you then went to the airport and smuggled agents into your family home.
Since I lived it and it's just our family story, for me it's so normal. Probably for someone who hasn't lived through something like that, it may sound, well, out of a movie, but that's what happened. That's what we did.
All right, so you were smuggling in the agents.
Exactly. So that was day 2. I must say it was quite impressive how quickly they reacted, because the kidnapping was in the evening the day before. I remember that mostly because it was already dark outside, and for the longest time after the kidnapping, I was scared of the dark. Still today, but now I'm back in Germany, so I'm fine. But I remember for the first months, if not even years, I would try to avoid to go out in the evening in dark hours. So we got the 2 agents in. I'm not going to say their actual names. Let's just call them Anna and Miguel. And it was a woman and a man. And we got them through the back door of the house, which wasn't visible from the street. So that nobody would actually see what was going on inside the house. And they would stay in a room on the backside of the house, which was a room. Many houses in Mexico have a room for housekeepers, for housekeeping staff. So it's a small room, and that's where we had those 2 agents, because there wasn't any window from the street to that room. Only to the back garden, but there was a big wall, so nobody could see in actually. And the very first thing they did is they took out their IDs, from their special force. They introduced them by their name. They said which special force they came from. They said they were called based on the call that had happened the night before, and that they're here to help us. It was extremely professional. And then we sat down and we went over everything that happened. So what had happened, how the kidnapping took place, what we knew so far. They asked if we had received another call by then, which was not the case. And they would then tell us what we would be expecting over the next few days. It was quite impressive because every little detail they said that could happen actually did happen. They have the psychology of kidnappings that
they know how the playbook of the kidnappers work usually.
Exactly. There's a psychology to kidnappers. So even though they're independent from another, normally they act in similar ways. Mm-hmm. And for example, they said the average kidnapping takes place from a week to 2 weeks. It is very normal that they haven't called back yet, because what they're trying to do right now is to build pressure, because the more pressured you are, the more nervous and scared you are, the easier it would be for them to get out of us whatever they wanted. And then they started to do role plays with us. So we had decided that I wouldn't be taking the calls, because me as a foreigner, they could hear an accent and they could probably think, oh, well, that's a German and we're going to get even more money here. Mm-hmm. So we assigned my sister-in-law to take the calls from that day on. And they started doing role plays with her to what she could be expecting during a call. They also installed a system so that they could record each call. And then I think the second call came on day 3 or 4.
Just a question. So you're all staying in the house, in your parents' in-law house, and you're waiting there for the call, and the kids are at an aunt's house and they don't know anything that's going on. During this whole time, you're staying there together.
Exactly. We're all staying together. We had the curtains closed, so from the street, nobody could be seeing what was going on inside the house. And we would just be you would be scared to go out, but also you wanted to be there because we were waiting next to the phone.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And whoever would call us who would not be the kidnappers, we would tell them, hang up, we can't take your call.
Yeah, of course.
That's the first thing we did. Nobody can call us, so that the line, of course, would be free for when they would call. And they did finally call. I don't remember exactly which day, but it was day 3 or 4. So it was quite a while. We were under so much pressure because, of course, in your head, you have the worst scenarios going on. My ex-husband and I always had some sort of a connection. For example, a few years prior, he was out working late, and I had already been in bed, and I woke up the very minute he had an accident. And so I was trying to listen to the universe to see if he's still alive. Didn't get any answer back, of course, from the universe. And we were mainly just pacing around the room like maniacs. I can't even explain how we were feeling those days. It's such an immense stress, terror, and of course the worst, thinking, is he okay? Are they mistreating him? Is he still alive? Are we going to see him again? I mean, it's the worst terror a human can go through, not knowing, if your loved one, what is going on with your loved one. That really is what I remember the most from those days, the extreme stress that we were all under mentally, and also my body always reacts to stress. We were all a nervous wreck.
You hear all the time people who have had people kidnapped, taken, gone missing, whatever the situation. And you hear over and over again, don't you, that the not knowing really is the hardest thing. That's the hardest.
That's the worst. And whenever I hear of cases where it takes months, years, or they never cold cases, and I wouldn't have survived something like that.
No, I think about that a lot. Like I was widowed young, but I've said to Johanna many times, like if something had happened, if he hadn't died, if I hadn't seen him die. If he had just gone missing or been taken, or I would still be in this weird limbo. Like,
there's no closure. That's if you have to imagine your loved one being in pain, tortured. Are they crying for you? What is going? They're not knowing. It's the worst. The worst.
Really, really worse. And of course, during those moments, you cannot concentrate on anything. So it's not that you sit at home and say, okay, I'm going to read a book now to kill time, or nothing. So your body was under extreme alert and under extreme stress and under extreme everything. And it was really tough. Of course, the first thing that one does is not eat, not do anything. And the agents were also trained for those situations. So they would order us that we would have to sit together at the table with them for breakfast, lunch, dinner, so that they would watch us eat, and they would sit at the table and they would not touch their food until we would at least insert a little bit of food. So they tried to keep.
That's really impressive. I'm so impressed with the response and how thorough it was.
Absolutely. My respect to those two people. It was really, really, everything they did was amazing. And
were they federal or state? Or different, like just a different, you don't have to say.
It's a special force that they have. I don't know if it's federal or state, actually. I never questioned them. We did talk a lot about, they open up a lot about their work. And that's also what I'm that I have utmost respect for, because imagine those people are being called for a crime, but they never actually know if they're actually heading to a kidnapping, or if it's actually a cartel or another criminal organization themselves that called them, because of course they didn't want these people to exist, because they would ruin their business.
It's a dangerous job.
And it's incredibly heroic to take yourself over and over again, take yourself away from your own family to go into the worst time in someone else's family and try to make things better. Yeah.
The female agent had 2 kids that were younger than mine back then, and I can't even imagine. I can't imagine how she did that. And those are the true heroes. That are unseen, but that risk everything and to help other families in need. And that's what they did. So during the first role play calls, they had told my sister-in-law that when the next call would come, they would normally call with whatever their demand was. And the first thing we're supposed to say is, we don't have that, or we don't have anything at all. And of course, we said, no way, because they're going to kill him immediately. Are you insane? We're going to offer them something. And said, no, you cannot offer anything. You do not have any money. The most you can tell them is that you can talk to family or friends or whoever, where you're trying to get a little bit of something somewhere, but you cannot, under no circumstance, offer them anything. And you have to tell them whatever the demand is, you don't have anything. So that's what my sister-in-law did, almost throwing up. Because of course we were fearing so much. We thought, okay, once we tell them that, that's it. But of course they have those kidnapping studied well, and they knew that they were not gonna do anything yet, but they would then wait. So they said they were gonna call back in a few days, and we had this and that amount of time to come up with the money. The money itself was quite a lot of money. It was about the worth of our own family home that we had. So it was quite a lot of money that you just wouldn't have sitting around anywhere.
Yeah, because all your money is in your home.
Yeah, of course.
Did you get, I don't mean to jump ahead and stop me if I am, but at any point when they first called you, did you actually get to speak to him? Did you get proof of life?
No.
Did you get to...
No, that's what the agents also told us, that once we would settle on an amount, we would then ask for the proof of life.
It makes me sweaty just thinking about it, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't...
Yeah, but it that was already in the plan, but we had to go step by step with their plan. And after each call, they would then analyze the call. They would send it actually back to their office, wherever that main office was, where they would also listen to the calls and send back reports and suggestions and such. And then we would be prepared for the next call. Since they had said they had given us that amount of time to come up with the money, we knew when more or less to expect a call. So we were again sitting next to the phone and nothing would happen. I think it took 5 days and no other call came in, and we were getting extremely nervous. And I already thought, okay, that's it. They killed him. He's not alive.
Nerve-wracking.
It was horrible.
It's too many days.
It was too many days. So what I did is I picked up the phone because I thought, okay, maybe something's wrong. And I heard, dude, our phone line was disconnected.
No.
In Mexico, if you don't pay your phone bill the very same day that it's due, they disconnect your line. And since we were in the house only focusing on the kidnapping, we didn't think of anything whatsoever.
And you had to, back then, I don't know if it's still like this, but back then you had to go there and pay. You couldn't just wire the money.
Exactly, yeah. So what we then did is we called Telcel, the headquarters, and explained our situations that we urgently need our phone line back. Can we pay you via credit card? Can you make an exception? They did, and our phone line came back about an hour later. Thank God. And then same day, the phone rang again, and it was them, and they were furious.
My God, this is Jesus. Okay.
Oh God! I mean, really, when you think what's the worst that can happen? I mean, we never thought our phone line was disconnected.
Yeah. No.
Oh God! Years later, we can now laugh about that scenario, but back then it was just, it was insane. So there were several more calls of going back and forth what they wanted and how much we could give until we finally settled on an amount. And the agents told us that under no circumstance can any of the family members go to deliver the money. So we had to search for somebody that could do us that favor. Now, of course, there are not too many people that, first of all, you can trust with a large amount of money. And second, who wants to risk their own life, for somebody that's not a family member. But the agents told us it happens quite often that if you send another family, they're being kidnapped too. And then they try to get even more money out of you. So we found somebody who was an employee, a very trusted employee of my in-laws, and he agreed to do it. He's another hero in our story. And then it went down really just like in the movies. They said they're going to call us on set day to give us instructions. And they did. They actually were very punctual that day. And they sent him to an OXXO, which is a convenience store, like a 7-Eleven, to buy a prepaid phone number. And they said to put the money in a dark bag, and he had to get a phone number. And once he was there, he would have to call us back at the home, give us the number. They would call us, ask for the number, and then they would call him directly without us. So to give him instructions where to drive, they did. But before that, all that happened, and before he left with the money, of course, we asked for the proof of life. And that's another thing that went down wrong, because they asked me, okay, think of a question that you can ask your husband that only the two of you would know. And the question that I did, he answered wrong. So,
What's my eye color?
But he was under that much stress too.
Yeah.
He got it wrong. So when the kidnappers called again, and we said, okay, the answer is wrong. What guarantee can you give us that he's still alive and that we're not going to give you anything? So either money, and I give you my word, mi palabra de bandido, he said. My
Ganovenehre.
Yeah, how would you say that in English?
Thief's honor, or do you have something like that, Annie? Like the honor of a criminal? Yeah.
Yes, like thieves. Yeah, honor among thieves.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So we had that, and we thought, okay, we're not going to trust this asshole anyways, but what other choice do we have?
Yeah.
I mean, we're just going to try, and if the money's lost, whatever. Doing those moments, what you also realize what matters in this world is under no circumstance money or any valuables, but the actual life. When we actually got the money together, it was my job to film the money. They gave me a camera and I had to film every single bill because they wanted the number on each bill on record. So if they would ever find the kidnapper, they would, with that money, prove that it came from them. That was our money, our ransom money.
Oh, okay.
And I remember filming that money and having that paper money in my hand, one after another. It took me forever, and I felt so disgusted. I felt so disgusted by money, by what humans are capable of doing to other humans for money. It's disgusting. It's disgusting.
You're buying and selling people, basically. And you just think, how was anybody ever okay with this?
So once our worker went off, he did receive the call. He was sent in the middle of nowhere out, because we were out anyways, out on the countryside. He was sent out to some random field where there was some random pole, and he had to leave that money there. And of course, we tracked immediately. We assumed that, of course, they had somebody watching him. And then we had to wait and see if Enrique would come back or not. All in all, this took 10 days. So that was pretty much in line with what the agents had told us what would happen. And Enrique, on the other hand, during all that time, was placed with a farmer family outside in the middle of nowhere. They actually they first drove with him to a lake, not a lake, a rio.
A river.
Then by boat, they sent him out to the middle of nowhere and placed him with a family. That family received 3,000 pesos cash back then. 3,000 pesos, $150. I mean, that was the worth of my husband.
Yeah.
Wow.
Family. $150. And these were hired by the kidnappers. They were not part of the organization. And their order was just to keep the victim there. They had him in a corner of the room, they had something on the wall, placed a metal structure where they would tie him to, and he had a thing on his head the whole time. And they had given orders that under no circumstance can the victims be fed. They wanted to keep them, with less energy and strength possible, so he wouldn't be able to escape.
Yeah.
But my husband has the ability or the gift to be able to talk to anybody. He's a very charismatic person. Of course, during that stress, he was not, but he was still able to somehow build a connection to the farmer family. He immediately noticed, or he pieced together that he was placed with a family, but that they were not actually the kidnappers themselves.
Right.
They were very, very poor folks from the countryside. And I remember afterwards my husband telling me that he had talked to those people, and he said, hunger is an asshole, but the bigger asshole is the person that has hunger. And that was the reason why they would, do those favors to $150. For them, that was a lot of money. And the farmer had told him how once his kid got sick and they wouldn't even have any money whatsoever to take them to the doctor. So it's people that live in extreme poverty. And for them, those are, a window of opportunity is a little bit of income. And that's why they work with those people. But thankfully, they wouldn't mistreat him. They would not do anything to him other than just have him there.
Yeah. And I'm sure from their perspective, it's like there could have been, someone's going to take this $150 to take this man.
Yeah, exactly.
And if they do it, at least they know he'll be all, they won't. That's a really, did they mistreat him? I think that's what Johanna was just asking.
Exactly.
No, if they fed, did they feed him? Yeah.
I gave him a little bit of chicken soup, just out of pity, really, even though they were ordered not to. And they gave him water to drink, yes, because
that's the more
dehydrated you can.
I mean, they sound like they were not bad people. You know what I mean? They were empathetic enough. They were just really poor.
Yeah, I would say they sound like victims themselves, except of course they did also make a decision to,
victims of poverty. So
exactly. I think they could be forgiven. I imagine your ex-husband didn't hold too much of a grudge.
No. Actually, no, because it could have been way worse.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. You don't want to be held captive by anybody, but all things considered.
Yeah, absolutely. He did tell me that the most stressful moment was actually when the leader of the group came in and wanted to cut his finger off to send it to us as a warning. It happened when our phone line was disconnected.
Oh, God.
They couldn't reach us, and so they wanted to send us a warning. Oh, God. But there again, I don't know how on earth, but that's Enrique. He was able to manage to talk him out of it, and he still has all his 10 fingers, thankfully. But it was a lot of stress on him too.
Yeah.
So the day that the ransom was delivered, they came for him, and they drove with him. Well, first they went back on the river, and then they drove him somewhere out on the countryside, and then they would call us and tell him, you have to go north that direction, that many miles, and you'll find him there. And in the same time, Enrique started walking out on the street trying to fight anybody, which he didn't until, well, our worker finally did see him and find him out on the countryside and home. Of course, he was heavily traumatized. The whole family was traumatized. He's still traumatized. And it's been now a few years, and
he's
never gonna get over that, but at least he did survive. So that was good. What we decided back then was to go back to Cancun immediately, which we did. And what we witnessed is the worst that exists in humanity, but also the best, because once we arrived back in Cancun, we couldn't back to our own home, which we still had, because remember that they had taken my bag with my wallet, and on my Mexican driver's license, it had our home address. Mm-hmm. So I said, hell no, I'm not going back in that house. They know where we live. So a friend of us gave us, first of all, took us in their own home, and then another friend had an apartment empty, a vacation home, and said, you can stay there for as long as you want. The school of my kids, they attended a private school, called us, said, we heard you're back in Cancun. We heard what happened. We're willing to take the kids in. You don't have to pay tuition right now. We're going to give you school uniforms until you're back on your feet.
Oh,
so there was a lot of support coming in from our community. So that was very moving to see that for every bad in this, every evil in this world, there's also the exact opposite good in people. That was very, 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 very moving.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But again, after what happened, I never truly felt safe anymore in Mexico. And my kids then were starting to get into an age of teenagers, and I wasn't able to let them out on the street. I would be scared every single day. Okay, I'm not going to see my kids again. So eventually we decided to move back to Germany, which we did in 2016. And we've been here since. And since we've been able to heal as a family, my husband and I got divorced in the meanwhile, but he's fine. He's still in Mexico. He's actually about to move to Spain.
I love Spain. That's great. He's going to be so much closer too.
Yeah, to his kids. Now they're now 19 and 20, so they're now young adults, but of course he'll be closer to them too. They did find the kidnappers too. Thankfully, it took quite a few more victims, unfortunately, until the government decided to finally act. With each victim they became more violent. There used to be an honor of criminals, and they would overstep that. For example, the honor was always men only, not you wouldn't touch kids or women, and they did. I know one of the later victims was a young boy. I think he was 10 or 12. They also kidnapped our neighbor, a woman, mistreated her badly. I know they raped her, and she had a heart attack and died, and they still collected the ransom money. The family never knew what happened to her until they finally did catch the kidnappers, and then the family finally had closure. So I think all in all, we were still lucky, because my ex-husband was one of the first victims who were still not as violent yet. But they were able to get them after, I think they had 15 or 20 victims in the end. So a lot of money too. Yeah. And the worst part of it all is the head of the group was a man that went to primary school with my ex-husband.
Really? No.
Yeah. The agents had told us that's very common, that when somebody's kidnapped, not from the drug cartels, but other normal kidnappings, it's usually somebody that knows you, because they try to identify who has money in their surroundings, and that's normally the people that they go after, and also a lot of time family members, even, unfortunately, too. So in that case, we knew who it was. And it was even more heartbreaking because that person growing up was a rather poor economy. He had a son who had died of cancer, and my in-laws had paid the funeral, and
Really?
It's
That's a betrayal.
It's beyond betrayal. It's just, I don't know. Ugh.
Yeah. Sorry, I wish you could see my face when I said that, because it was very.
Once we left to Cancun, imagine we had the house that we had rented in Tabasco. They emptied our house completely. Everything that was in there, everything was gone. So it was quite hard having to start from scratch again. But after such a thing, what you realize is material things don't matter. Of course, what hurt me were things, the kids' toys, our photo albums, everything of, that had sentimental value was gone too. But
they took photo albums.
The kidnappers took it from your house in Cancun?
No, from the house in Tabasco that we had rented, because once he was freed, we immediately took off, and we were staying with friends. So
and they had your keys and everything.
Yeah, they just walked in and they emptied the house. But whatever.
Those fuckers. It's like someone once, I mean, I'm not in any way comparing these two things, but someone once broke into my car and stole all my mixtapes. And I was like, what kind of absolute sociopath takes someone else's mixtapes?
Yeah, of course.
And that's all I can think is like, who the fuck takes photo album? Like,
they were thrown away. They would just empty the house.
Yeah, they would take everything and then just look through the stuff, I guess. Because
I'm just so angry. Were you able to get anything back? Like when they were caught?
No, well, they did catch the guy, the head of the group, and his close workers that were in the organized crime with him. They took them down, they froze their bank accounts, and they confiscated everything of worth. But how it works is that as a family, you don't get anything back, but whatever they are able to retrieve from that sort of organizational crime, they use it for victims' funds, for example, for therapy, or for example, where a victim doesn't come back, it could have been the father of the family and they need support, economic support to feed the kids, whatever. That's what that money is used for. So
you can't be angry at that.
No,
use of funds.
And they did catch him. I just sent the link to Johanna earlier from one of the newspaper clippings, and let me look it up how much they gave him. Okay, so he got 356 years in prison. He has to pay 36,375 days multa. It's called in Mexico. It's a minimum wage per day. So 36,000 times the minimum wage in fines. And so he's never gonna see the daylight out of prison again.
Good.
And I know some of the other guys that were in the organization with him are also in jail. They didn't receive as many years as this guy, but none of them are going to come out. So good. At least that doesn't make up for anything. No, it really doesn't. But at least what you know is they're not out there doing no good.
Yeah, so exactly.
Peace of mind. Yep.
That was. I'm having goosebumps, and I knew the story already, but it's still. You think these kind of things happen in movies, right?
Yeah.
And how calm you are. Yeah. It's like, and then we smuggled the guys in the back of the car.
It wasn't always calm. Now it's a few years have passed. And
of course. Oh, no, of course. I can't imagine anybody. Well, you get that kind of shocky calm that comes over everybody in those situations, but you're certainly not calm.
Yeah, exactly. It did take years to be. It helped moving back to Germany. Yeah. Being here, I know we're safe. Nothing's gonna happen to us here. But what I try to focus on is on the good of the people, because we also received so much love and support from our community, and that's worth way more than whatever was lost. And it made us stronger as a family, and we grew together. My kids and I mean, when we moved back to Germany, we had to start over again. We arrived here with a suitcase, and my husband back then, we had offered him to take him along. He didn't want to back then, and it made us my kids and I have a very special and very thick bond. And with my ex-husband too, we're still very good friends today. I mean, he's an excellent friend. I love him as a person and as the father of my kids. So,
that's ideal, really.
Yeah, I think we're the happiest divorced couple you'll ever meet. And we talk quite a bit, of course, mostly about the kids. But whenever it's my birthday, he really always is the first one that calls. And yeah, we have
That's nice. I'm so glad that you all came through it together. Did you tell the kids when he was home, or did you wait till they were
That
way
was just
older?
my question. Yeah, I wanted to know.
We waited till he was home and until he was a little better.
Yeah.
And we sat down at the aunt's house where my kids had been staying at the whole time. And we sat down at the kitchen table, and my ex-husband said, "So kids, so this is what happened. We were driving home that day after school. Do you remember? Well, then a few bad guys came and they invited me to come along. And my son
invited me.
Right there, you got kidnapped, right?" So I thought that was heartbreaking because kids in Mexico grow up. For them, it was just the normal thing. We were trying to put it into nice words, and they exactly knew what was.
They knew immediately, didn't they?
Yeah.
It's so sad too when you realize I had that. I was just in Northern Ireland visiting a good friend I hadn't seen in 30 years. And I was talking with her kids, and I said something about, really casually, I said, oh, my house always looks like a bomb went off. And I think the 11-year-old said, "Oh dear, did a bomb go off?" And just, do you know what I mean, though? You just get that little sharp pain in your heart that is like, oh, the fact you had to ask that question. It's just.
We always tried to shield them from what was going on around us in Mexico. So when I was driving them to school and on the radio, they would say, "Oh, we found another mass grave of 230. I would turn off the radio, same on the TV, but there was no escape in Mexico. You
can't. Well, it's the same thing, and every country has their thing, right? Here it's school shootings.
Yeah.
Ireland has, it's Mexico has kidnappings.
Yeah, but other countries really do have it worse, unfortunately.
Yeah. Ingrid, what an amazing story.
Thank you so much for telling it, really.
Of course. Not a pleasure, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's just a really, just what an incredible story of just, the thing that strikes me is just how close a family you have and how you were all able to sort of lean on each other and your greater family in the community, because I think it's easy to forget sometimes that, our neighbors, we're all in this together. We're all just trying to survive out here. And I'm sure they all realize it could be one of theirs family members. That's just amazing. I'm so glad you all have done so well in the aftermath.
Absolutely. I'm grateful for that too. And again, we have to look at I think there's more people out in this world than bad people, but those few bad people really cause a lot of damage.
I always say that when people tell me, well, there's just, most people are bad people. And I really don't believe that. I think most people are neutral to good.
Agreed.
And if you put them in the situation, they will mostly be good people in one-on-one situations where they really need to step up. But as you said, there's a handful of evil people compared to the amount of good people or neutral people, and they are just creating chaos and suffering and pain.
Yeah.
But they're also how Johanna and I met. So silver lining.
It's true. It's true.
It's true. Thanks, Ingrid.
All right. Thank you, Ingrid.